A young New Zealander and Rhodes Scholar Max Harris on his brainchild, the New Zealand Project. It's a vision for confronting the country's challenges through a rejuvenation of the political process and citizen participation. The New Zealand Project's also the title of his book, about to be published, essentially calling for a paradigm shift towards progressive politics and a new framework for economic thinking. It's a plea to put values centre stage of the political and judicial arena, and something Max calls the politics of love. The project and the book is the result of the Kiwi scholar's success in what's been dubbed the hardest examination in the world, and being elected an examination fellow at All Souls College, Oxford, a 7-year fellowship with the freedom to study without research or examination obligations. Max Harris is a graduate of Auckland University, was previously a clerk to Chief Justice Sian Elias at the New Zealand Supreme Court, and has worked as a consultant in Helen Clark's office at the United Nations Development Programme. He also helped set up the criminal justice group Just Speak, and also public interest organisation Law for Change. He's heading back to England next month to continue working on his PhD in constitutional law, but he is here in the studio with me now. Good morning.
Good morning,
with
Catherine.
copious notes, I have to say. You've already written a book.
To make sure I'm well prepared.
You've had a tremendous opportunity, really, to put your mind to a big idea. What has that big idea brought together in this book? How do you sum it up to people?
The big idea, I think, is that we've lost values-based politics in New Zealand. That means that we've lost the sense that politics is motivated by values and that politics is there to achieve values. And that's for several reasons. That's because politics has become a bit technical and technocratic. That's because we've lost a general sense of direction in politics. And it's because I think there's been a rise of selfishness and self-interestedness in society as a whole in the last 20 to 30 years, which has crowded out space for values. So the big proposal in the book is that we need to bring back values into politics, and that is one way we can connect politics to people's everyday experiences. It's one way we can draw on the best of Māori traditions in this country. It's one way we can actually change people's minds, because the evidence shows that you don't change people's minds by flooding them with facts, but rather by appealing to their values. And I try to apply particular values, the values of care, community and creativity, to a series of political challenges that I think are facing Aotearoa New Zealand today.
It's all become a bit cynical.
It's partly become cynical, but I'd say that the problem is broader than that. And the way that politics has become technical and the way it's become an appeal to self-interest has stopped politics from being able to reach for those higher ideals. I think a lot of young people in particular would be much more interested in politics were it to be connected to values like the values of care, community and creativity.
That's very interesting. When we look at the voting statistics just recently, I wasn't terribly surprised that perhaps an 18 to 24 cohort didn't have high voter participation. Some would be, like you, bursting out of their skin from birth to be involved and to be involved in the debate and to vote. What did surprise me was how few, even at age 35, I think it was still over a third of New Zealanders not voting. Yeah. The reason that surprised me is that the perception is, I guess, people vote either when they've got something they passionately believe in or when they've got something to protect or something, an interest, a particular interest in who governs the country. Why the hey are people at 35 in significant numbers not turning up once every 3 years for 1 minute to vote? Why?
Yeah, so you're right. I think according to the Electoral Commission, people under the age of 34 are significantly less likely to register and to vote. And I think it's partly to do with what's happened in our society in the last 20 to 30 years. I think a lot of people feel quite desensitised and they feel quite demoralised. I mean, that was a word used to me by someone I interviewed for the book. And I think there's a loss of a sense of community amongst a lot of young people, a loss of a sense that we have a stake in the society out there, and that affects voting levels or interest in politics. But I don't want to paint too negative a picture because, as I say in the book, young people are engaged in lots of other ways, through social media, through blogging, through street art, through music. But actually I think that those other forms of engagement should force us to ask the question, why is mainstream politics so unappealing if people do have opinions and are engaged in other spheres? Why is this vehicle, which could be provide the potential for so much positive change, not something that young people want to get involved with?
How do you put values back? The reason I use the word cynical is because so much of politics, to put it bluntly, is cynical. Whether it's the proliferation of spin doctors who weren't actually, they just didn't exist 30 years ago. And now there's as many of them as there is people in the public service, some would say. But that management of the message and, you know, the sort of the brutal realpolitik of getting enough votes together with a bunch of other people to govern has probably crowded out really ambitious values and the ability to communicate really ambitious values. What do you do, however, to get them back in? What does it take to get it back in?
Well, there's a couple of things at a general level first, and then I could talk about some specifics too. I do want to say I think politics is clearly not easy, and I think a lot of people go into politics with very high aims. But one thing that I think is important is trying to unwind some of that individualism that started to creep up perhaps 20 to 30 years ago, perhaps when those people who aren't engaged in politics now were born. We could do that by starting to sketch a new economic framework, or to work towards a new economic framework less grounded in individualism, that talks about the fact that we do live in a society where we're all in it together. And that's one thing that I think we have to do. But beyond that, I think we need a bit more of a sense of a positive vision, a goal that we're working towards. And I offer just one model for that in the book, in talking about care, community and creativity. But what I say in the book is that everyone has a New Zealand project, I think, here in some form. And we need to unlock all of those projects that people have and try to encourage people to be more engaged. And I talk towards the end of the book about an idea of genuine people power, which could allow people to take action at an individual level, but also at a collective level where some of the problems are too great for individuals to deal with.
How so? Give us an example.
Well, one clear example is climate change, where I think getting individuals to make changes in their daily lives is clearly very important. But when it comes to trying to reduce New Zealand's emissions on a national level, we need planning, we need coordinating, we need smart action at the global level. Another example where you need both individual and collective action is when it comes to what some people call race relations, or decolonisation in this country. And I mean, there was this example of 3 Otorohanga students who took a petition to Parliament to get a commemoration of the New Zealand Wars. And that was really powerful individual action that has started to spark a debate about owning New Zealand history, but that also requires us as a society, and it requires the government to think through the negative effects of colonisation that we still see on Aotearoa New Zealand, and thinking about how to unwind those effects.
When we talk about values, it's interesting when I think about some of the senior politicians who've I've seen operate, sometimes quite up close. I wouldn't say many of them are Son's values. 1 or 2, I would wonder what the dominant driving force is, put it that way. I don't think anyone is going to put that much time and energy in their life into politics if they don't start with some kind of a sense of wanting to do something, right?
Yeah.
And even those who are in quite senior levels and who do have to live with the realpolitik, I would still see in many of them, I think, of genuine values. The problem is the disconnect between what it is they believe in and want to achieve and the day-to-day practical realities of governing or of getting elected. If we stay at that end of things, organised politics, do you have any solutions for breaking that down? Or is it in fact connected to the people power? In that, in the end, what politicians need to see is a sufficient block of voters, individually or corporately, wanting something to happen, therefore giving them the mandate to take the risk to do something that is difficult. Will we not have the former without a better, more coordinated and more powerful people power?
It's the latter, I think. So Nikki Hager, who I interviewed for the book, said that in the end, politicians follow. And I've developed that idea in the book to try to say that, we need to give politicians something inspiring to follow, or some pressure that drives them in a more progressive direction. So I do think it's got to be a movement outside of politics that pushes politicians to be more values-driven and gives them permission to speak in those terms. I think we can also encourage politics to be done in a different way because, as you say, this is not about blaming individual politicians. It's a problem with the system. But I think a lot of people are really put off by the sort of game playing and name calling that you see in the House. And not to pick one politician, but I heard Paula Bennett last week in response to a challenge around this saying that's politics. And my reaction to that was, is that what politics has to be? And couldn't we hope for a politics that is a bit more focused on values and a bit more focused on substance? But as you say, that has to be a pressure that comes from outside of mainstream politics. What
about the discussions that we have or don't have around politics in the broader sense? Because reading the book, I do see, and you touch on a lot of individual challenges, but I do see things that, to me, sit neatly in the manifesto of a pretty conventional, policy priority list for progressive parties, right? For politics, for more liberal or left-leaning rather than what might be dubbed conservative or right-leaning issues. What I loved hearing you talk a year ago at an event we were at together was that actually when you spoke, I didn't hear that so much. How do we get beyond people's natural inclinations towards a conservative set of policies or a conservative set of concerns or a more progressive set of concerns? Get beyond that and talk about solutions in a way that doesn't become politicised and brutally politically tribal. Because this really frustrates the hell out of me. But how do we get there?
Well, to me, it's partly about going back to first principles. And with the book, I genuinely hope that it's of interest to people on both the left and the right. And that's why I've chosen the values of care, community and creativity. I've called them progressive values because I think most New Zealanders can sign up to some idea of progress. But I've also chosen those values because I think actually every New Zealander realises the importance of care, if that means showing some concern for people and the environment outside of ourselves, or for community if that means understanding that we're interdependent and that we shouldn't drift too far apart. And I think if we go back to those first principles, we try to get agreement on those first principles, we're not always going to agree on what comes from those principles, the conclusions we might reach, but at least that allows some high-level agreement and a starting point for more substantive discussion.
Another conversation about at the moment comes back to the demographics again, and I made that comment earlier that people get out and vote if they believe very strongly in something or if they have something to protect, right? Yeah. Which works the numbers in some ways against generations coming through who don't have businesses yet or don't have property yet. And I don't want to be that cynical to say people vote solely on their situations. I don't believe anyone does. But your immediate concerns, whether it's having kids in the education system or having a parent getting near aged care or having a business you need to be able to function, they are definitely part of the mix. So if that demographic bulge at the moment is perceived to be in some ways against some of the younger voters and what their needs and their concerns are, how do we energise them anyway? I mean, how and where is the outlet for them to begin to build a politics around their priorities and concerns?
Well, I should say first, I don't really buy into too much of this discussion around a big generational divide. No. Yeah, and some of the best sort of political experiences I've had have involved young people working with older people. So when I was working with Just Speak, the youth-based criminal justice organisation, Kim Workman, a less young person who spent his life wanting a rethink around imprisonment, worked with us and supported us. Same with the climate change and environmental group Generation Zero. So I actually think that that's part of the answer, is building more of those intergenerational partnerships, getting young people working with older people. But there are also some very specific things that could be done to encourage young people to be more involved. And one thing I talk about in the book is civics education, because I think there is an an education gap and an interest gap for a small number of young people, and having education about politics towards the end of people's high school lives as they're going in to vote for the first time is a useful nudge for people towards the ballot box.
There's something else that impressed me when I heard you speak a year ago, is, again, when I was reading your thesis as it was then, just sort of precede then, it was that idealism, that most of us get beaten out of us over time. And then when you spoke, I didn't hear an idealism or a naivety. I actually heard a really practical and focused set of actions to be taken. And again, that's something that needs to be communicated as well, isn't it? This isn't some sort of hopeless thing you do for a while before settling down to, what was it Churchill said? But, this is a sense of, it is practical, it is doable, like any other big ambitious thing we should take on in life. And communicating that sense, instead of it being a sense of the idealists go and do this stuff and everyone else eventually goes, no, it's not going to happen. You guys are the masters of social media. You're the masters of communication very broadly across boundaries, across countries. Are we seeing that kind of communicative capacity and idea sharing capacity? Are we really seeing it being developed and maximised in the way that it can be? To get it beyond being talking about ideals and actual practical pressure that delivers results.
It's really interesting. Just on the idealism point, I do think we need a mixture of sort of vision and practicality. And when I talked to Moana Jackson, the constitutional thinker and lawyer, he said politics shouldn't be just the art of the possible, it should be the art of what is not quite possible at the moment, but what should be possible. And I think we need to tie that sense of vision with some very specific ideas which put together could be a program towards a different future. But on your social media question, I think there are clearly positives and negatives of social media. I think a lot of people, and in particular, I think women can get trolled online, and there can be some very insulting and mean-spirited discussions. But I think social media offers a very speedy and exciting way to organise people fast. And I've seen gatherings of people, organised, and we've seen this all around the world recently, in a very short amount of time. I've also seen people start to use Facebook almost like a blog, and that removes the sort of gatekeeper function of other journalistic outlets. So I think there's a lot of potential there, and young people in particular, are using social media in a principled way that allows politics to be better, but we should be aware of its downsides too.
Thank you. Very exciting. You've got the Michael King Memorial Lecture coming up amongst your visit home.
That's right.
Excellent. Yeah. Congratulations again. And the book, I think, is being launched tonight, is it?
That's right.
The Royal Society.
Yes.
Thanks, Max.
Thanks,
the New Zealand project by Max Harrison is giving the Michael King Memorial Lecture Friday, 19th May, as part of the Auckland Writers' Festival.